The air was thick with the scent of dust and gasoline as the old sedan rattled to a stop in front of a weathered iron gate. Emily, barely 10 years old, sat in the back seat, clutching a frayed backpack to her chest. Her small hands trembled, not from the chill of the late autumn afternoon, but from something deeper, something that had carved itself into her bones. Her dark brown hair hung in tangled strands, brushing against her pale cheeks, half hiding eyes that hadn't sparkled in years. She was a shadow of a girl, too small for the weight she carried. The driver, a man named Tom who knew her grandfather from town, stepped out and pulled open the creaky door. "Here we are, kid," he said, his voice soft but heavy with the kind of pity Emily had learned to recognize. She slid out slowly, her scuffed purple suitcase dragging behind her, kicking up clouds of dust that clung to her sneakers. The house beyond the gate was old, wooden, and unassuming, a two-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, nestled in a quiet corner of a small American town where cornfields stretched toward the horizon. Henry stood on the porch, waiting. He was tall and lean, dressed in faded denim overalls and a checkered shirt rolled up to the elbows. His beard, peppered with gray, framed a face etched with lines of time and loss. He didn't move toward her, didn't offer a smile or a hug. Instead, he gave a slight nod, as if to say, "So it's you. You're here." Emily's eyes stayed glued to the mud-splattered tips of her boots. "Hello, sir," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Henry nodded again. "Come on in, Emily. It's getting late." Inside, the house smelled of pine and dust baked into the wood. The narrow staircase creaked as Henry led her upstairs to a small room at the end of the hallway, the same room her mother, Susan, had slept in as a child. Nothing had changed. Faded books lined the shelves, a ragdoll slumped in the corner, and a framed photo of Susan, maybe 7 years old, stood by the window. Her features were so like Emily's, same wide eyes, same sharp cheekbones, that it felt like looking into a mirror that showed a different life. Emily set her suitcase beside the bed and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. No tears came, just an ache, empty and spreading, settling into her like a fog. Dinner was simple: fried chicken and boiled vegetables, served on a long wooden table that stretched across the kitchen. Henry wasn't much of a cook, but he was methodical, his movements precise, as he set the plates down. Emily nibbled at the carrots and green beans, her fork scraping softly against the plate. The silence between them was wide, swallowing even the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. "Want some more?" Henry asked, his voice rough but not unkind, like someone who hadn't spoken much in years. Emily shook her head. "I'm okay." He didn't push. Maybe he understood that silence could say more than words. Still, her quietness seemed to unsettle him. He looked at her, so small, so slight, and let out a sigh he tried to hide. That night, Emily lay curled up in bed, her back to the room, staring at the dark wall. She couldn't close her eyes. The images flickered behind them, a door creaking open in the night, heavy footsteps, the stench of liquor, and hands that should never have touched her. Downstairs, Henry sat in a creaky wooden chair by the window, a book open on his lap. The light was on, but he wasn't reading. His mind was upstairs, on the girl who'd come to him broken, and the question that hung unspoken: "What happened to you, Emily? What brought you here like this?" Morning came early, with sunlight slipping through the small window, painting soft gold lines across the worn walls. A rooster crowed from behind the house, and somewhere in the distance, a tractor rumbled to life. Emily woke but didn't move, her eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, as if she could pull herself back from a dream she didn't understand. She heard Henry outside, his boots squelching in the wet dirt as he fed the chickens. Drawn to the sound, she slipped on oversized slippers and followed. When Henry turned, Emily was there, her hair a mess, her eyes wide but guarded. He looked down at her, then held out a basket of grain. "Want to try feeding them?" She paused, then nodded. They didn't talk, didn't need to. The chickens clucked and fluttered around them, their feathers catching the morning light. One pecked at Emily's toe, and she let out a faint laugh, a sound so soft, like a breeze slipping through trees. Henry noticed. His eyes caught the moment her face loosened, when the weight she carried lifted just enough to let something else shine through. "Ever had chickens before?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No, there weren't any, in that place." Her voice cracked, and she turned her eyes away. That place. She couldn't say more. The memory of it was a weight she wasn't ready to touch. Henry didn't press. He just handed her more grain and let the silence settle again. That afternoon, they went to the village market. Emily stayed close to Henry, one hand clutching her cloth bag. The market was alive with the hum of voices, farmers haggling over apples, kids chasing each other past stalls of homemade jams and quilts. People were kind, offering smiles and nods, but Emily couldn't meet their eyes. When a vendor leaned too close, her heart pounded in her throat, her body freezing. She glanced at Henry, as if he were the only thing keeping her tethered to the ground. Back at the house, Henry found a small piece of paper on the kitchen table. It was a pencil drawing of a chicken from that morning, pecking at grain. Beneath it, in careful print, were the words, "Her name is Daisy." Henry's lips twitched into a smile, the first real one in years. It had been a long time since anything so small, so alive, had sat on that table. That night, the dreams came again. A dark room. A looming figure. The low, cruel sound of laughter. An arm, heavy as iron, closing around her. Emily jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The shadows of the room swam around her. Then, a soft creak. The door opened, and Henry stood there, holding a small oil lamp, its light flickering like a promise. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. Emily shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. All she could do was stare at him, her eyes red and raw. He didn't come in, didn't ask more. He just stood in the doorway and said, "I'll be in the hallway. Call if you need me." As he turned to leave, Emily's voice broke through, small and trembling. I hate hearing footsteps. At night. They bring things back." Henry paused mid-step, his head turning slightly. Something shifted in his expression, something deep, quiet, and heavy. "All right," he said after a moment. "I'll tread softer from now on. And no one comes in here unless you want them to. That's a promise." The next morning, Emily found him at the chicken coop again. She clutched a fresh sheet of paper on which she'd drawn another chicken, nestled beside Daisy. Holding it up, she murmured, "I'm naming this one Henry. He's the leader." Henry glanced at the drawing and let out a dry chuckle, rough but genuine. His eyes brightened in a way Emily hadn't seen before. "Leader, huh? That's a big job for a chicken." She smiled, just a flicker, but it was enough. She was letting him in, little by little, and he knew it. "Before I go on, I want to ask something of you. If this story moves you, if it speaks to the part of you that knows what it's like to carry pain in silence, please subscribe to the channel." That single click helps stories like Emily's reach others who are still trapped in their own darkness, waiting for a way out. The days began to find a rhythm. Emily rose with the sun, helped feed the chickens, and sometimes watered the apple trees out back. Henry didn't say much, but he always saved her the best parts of every meal, the softest peaches, the crispiest edges of toast, the juiciest piece of chicken. He watched her closely, not in a stifling way, but noticing how she flinched when a door slammed, how her shoulders tensed at the sound of a stranger's voice. One afternoon, while cleaning out the barn, Emily found an old wooden box under a tarp. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed, filled with her mother's handwriting. There were colored pens, too, and a faded photo of Susan as a girl, sitting between Henry and a woman Emily knew must be her grandmother. She traced her mother's face, her fingers lingering on the smile that felt so far away. "Was she happy?" Emily asked, her voice soft as she held the photo out to Henry. Did she laugh a lot? Henry paused, setting down his rake. She laughed all the time. Talked so much I couldn't get a word in. His voice was warm, but his eyes were heavy with memory. Emily smiled, but it faded quickly, like a candle snuffed out. I used to be like that too, she whispered. But I'm not anymore. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling between them. Henry didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. He saw her, really saw her, and that was enough for now. The days at Henry's house unfolded like the slow turning of a page, each one carrying Emily a little further from the darkness she'd known. But inside her, the shadows lingered. Every night, she lay awake, her heart racing at the faintest creak of the floorboards, her mind replaying the sound of footsteps that weren't Henry's, footsteps that had once meant pain, shame, and a silence she didn't have words for. She was only 10, but she felt older, as if her childhood had been stolen and replaced with something heavy, something that pressed against her chest even in the quiet of this new home. Emily didn't trust the safety Henry offered, not yet. She wanted to, but trust felt like a glass she was afraid to hold, certain it would shatter in her hands. In the mornings, she'd sit on the edge of her bed, clutching a worn pencil, its tip dulled from hours of sketching. Drawing was her refuge, the only place where the chaos in her mind could take shape without judgment. Her sketches were simple at first: chickens, the apple tree out back, the curve of the porch railing. But sometimes, late at night, her pencil would betray her, tracing images she didn't want to see: a faceless man in a dark room, a bolted window, a girl curled up so small she might disappear. She'd hide those drawings under her mattress, afraid that if Henry saw them, he'd look at her differently, not with kindness, but with pity, or worse, disbelief. Emily's fear wasn't just of the past, it was of herself. She wondered if she was broken beyond repair, if the things that had happened to her had left a stain no one could wash away. When Henry looked at her, she searched his eyes for judgment, for a sign that he saw her as damaged. But all she found was a quiet steadiness, like the way the cornfields stood tall even in a storm. Still, she couldn't shake the voice in her head that whispered, "You're not worth this. You'll ruin this too." One crisp October morning, Henry took her to the town's fall festival, a yearly tradition where the market square bloomed with hay bales, pumpkin stalls, and the warm smell of cider. Emily stayed close to him, her hands stuffed deep in the pockets of her oversized hoodie, her eyes darting nervously at the crowd. The laughter and chatter felt foreign, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. A woman selling apple pies leaned forward, offering Emily a slice with a warm smile. "You must be Henry's granddaughter. You've got your mama's eyes." Emily froze, her breath catching. The kindness felt like a spotlight, exposing her. She stepped back, pressing against Henry's side, her heart pounding as if the woman could see the secrets she carried. Henry rested a hand on her shoulder, light but firm. "She's just shy," he said, his voice calm, deflecting the attention. As they walked away, Emily's fingers tightened around the pencil in her pocket, its familiar weight grounding her. She wanted to thank Henry, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she spent the ride home staring out the window, the golden fields blurring past, her mind wrestling with the guilt of being so afraid in a place where no one had hurt her. That evening, while Henry chopped firewood outside, Emily sat at the kitchen table, sketching. Her pencil moved slowly, tracing the outline of the apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit. But as she drew, her hand faltered, and the tree's shadow grew darker, its branches twisting into something that looked like arms reaching out. She stopped, her breath hitching. The pencil snapped in her grip, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She stared at the broken pieces, her chest tight with a familiar panic. "It's still here," she thought. "He's still here, inside me." She shoved the drawing under a book, her hands trembling, and ran upstairs, curling up on her bed. The shame was overwhelming, not just for what had happened, but for how it clung to her, like a stain she couldn't scrub away. Henry noticed. He always did. When he came inside, he found the kitchen empty, the broken pencil still on the table, the half-finished drawing peeking out from under the book. He didn't touch it, didn't pry. Instead, he climbed the stairs, his steps deliberately soft, and knocked gently on her door. "Emily? You okay in there?" She didn't answer at first. Her voice felt trapped, locked behind a wall of fear and self-doubt. But Henry's presence, steady and unyielding, was like a crack in that wall. "I'm fine," she whispered finally, barely loud enough for him to hear. He didn't push, just stood there a moment longer. "I'm making hot cocoa. Come down when you're ready." His boots retreated, softer than before, honoring his promise to tread lightly. Emily lay there, her fingers tracing the edge of her blanket, her mind a tangle of thoughts. She wanted to believe Henry's kindness was real, that she could be safe here. But every time she let herself hope, the memories clawed their way back, her grandfather's heavy hands, the locked door, the way her mother, Susan, had looked away when Emily tried to tell her. The guilt gnawed at her. Why didn't I scream louder? Why didn't I run? And worse, the fear that if she told Henry the truth, he'd see her as less a granddaughter, less a person, just a broken thing to be pitied. The next morning, Emily woke to the smell of pancakes. She found Henry in the kitchen, flipping them with a precision that belied his rough hands. He slid a plate toward her, the pancakes golden and warm, topped with a drizzle of maple syrup. "Thought you might like these," he said, his voice gruff but kind. Emily took a small bite, the sweetness startling her. She hadn't tasted anything so good in a long time. "Thank you," she mumbled, her eyes on the plate. For a moment, she felt something loosen inside her, like a knot slowly unraveling. She glanced at Henry, his silver hair catching the morning light, and wondered if he could see her, the real her, not just the girl who flinched at shadows. That afternoon, while feeding the chickens, Emily found herself talking, her words small but deliberate. "Daisy's my favorite," she said, pointing to the chicken she'd named. "She's brave. She doesn't let the others push her around." Henry nodded, scattering grain. "Sounds like she's got some fight in her. Like someone else I know." Emily's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, but a tiny spark of pride flickered in her chest. It was the first time she'd felt anything close to strong in years. She didn't know if Henry meant it, but his words stayed with her, like a seed planted in dry soil. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the house became a kind of anchor for Emily. She helped Henry with chores, her small hands learning the weight of a watering can, the texture of chicken feed. But the dreams didn't stop. One night, she woke gasping, the image of a faceless man burned into her mind. She stumbled to her sketchbook, her hands shaking as she drew. A dark room, a bolted window, a girl with no face. When she finished, she tore the page out and stuffed it under her pillow, terrified of what it meant. "If I show him," she thought, "he'll know I'm ruined." Henry's suspicions grew. He saw the way Emily's hands shook when she heard a loud noise, the way her eyes darted to the door at night. He found another drawing one morning, left on the table by accident, a sketch of a chicken, but behind it, a shadow shaped like a man. His chest tightened, a quiet rage building. He didn't know the full story, but he knew enough to feel the weight of it. He sat at his desk that evening, writing in an old notebook. She's scared. Something happened to her. "I don't know what, but I'll be damned if I let her carry it alone." One chilly morning, as Emily helped Henry stack firewood, a sleek black car rolled up the dirt road. The air seemed to thicken, the world slowing as a man stepped out tall, sharp in a black suit with a crimson tie that cut through the gray day like a blade. James, her stepfather, the man from her nightmares. His smile was thin, calculated, his eyes scanning the house like a predator sizing up prey. "Mr. Graves, James said smoothly, climbing the porch steps. "I've come for Emily. Susan's gone, and I'm her legal guardian now." Henry stood firm, his eyes narrowing. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice low, steel beneath it. "Get off my land." Emily, standing behind Henry, felt her breath catch. The pencil in her pocket snapped in her grip. It wasn't just a man on the porch. It was the monster from her dreams, standing in the daylight, threatening to pull her back into the dark. The dust from James's black car still lingered in the air as Henry stood on the porch, his arms wrapped protectively around Emily. Her small frame trembled against him, her breath shallow and ragged, as if the sight of her stepfather had ripped open a wound she'd tried so hard to stitch shut. Henry's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the empty road where the car had disappeared behind the cornfields. He didn't know the full truth of what James had done, but the terror in Emily's eyes told him enough. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Inside, the house felt smaller, the air heavier. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her hands clenched around the broken pencil, her eyes staring blankly at the wood grain. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock. Henry sat across from her, his hands folded, searching for words that wouldn't scare her more. "He's gone, Emily," he said finally, his voice steady but soft. "He won't come in here. Not while I'm here." Emily nodded, but her eyes didn't meet his. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped in a memory she couldn't escape. James's shadow in her doorway, the weight of his hands, the way her mother, Susan, had once looked at her with eyes that pleaded for silence. "Don't tell," Susan had whispered once, her voice trembling. "It'll only make things worse." Emily had obeyed, swallowing her pain, but the guilt gnawed at her now. If I'd spoken then, would Mama still be here? Would I be different? The questions circled like vultures, and she hated herself for not having answers. Henry saw the storm in her eyes. He stood, moving slowly to the stove. "Tea?" he asked, as if something as simple as chamomile could hold back the darkness. Emily nodded again, her fingers tracing the pencil's jagged edge. She wanted to tell him, wanted to spill every secret, every scream she'd buried, but the words felt like glass in her throat. "What if he doesn't believe me?" she thought. "What if he thinks I'm lying, or worse, that I deserved it?" The next morning, Henry drove to the county seat, his old pickup rattling along the winding roads. The courthouse loomed in the heart of town, a squat brick building with cold, sterile light spilling from its windows. He met with a clerk, a woman with sharp eyes and a clicking pen, who scanned James's guardianship papers. "According to this," she said, her voice flat, "your daughter's husband has full legal custody. Unless you can prove he's unfit, there's not much we can do without a court order." Henry walked out with a sour taste in his mouth. The law, which he'd always trusted like a compass, felt like a trapdoor ready to drop Emily back into the hands of the man she feared most. He didn't tell her right away, not wanting to add to her burden. Instead, he stopped by the home of June, a neighbor who'd been close to his late wife. June's kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee, and her eyes were heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "I always worried about Susan marrying that man," June said, stirring her tea slowly. Something about him, his smile, never reached his eyes. "I saw him yell at her once, in the parking lot of the diner." Her face went white as chalk, and she didn't say a word. Henry leaned forward, his voice low. Do you think he ever hurt Emily?" June's lips pressed together, her hesitation a confession in itself. "I can't say for sure, Henry. But if your gut's telling you something's wrong, don't ignore it." That evening, as the town prepared for Thanksgiving, Henry and Emily joined the community at the church hall. The air was warm with the scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, and tables were laden with dishes brought by neighbors. Emily stayed close to Henry, her hoodie pulled tight around her, her eyes darting nervously at the crowd. The laughter and chatter felt like a wall she couldn't climb. When a pastor reached out to greet her, She flinched, stepping back so quickly she nearly tripped. Henry's hand found hers, steady and warm, and he led her outside without a word. On the walk home, Emily was silent, her mind replaying the pastor's outstretched hand, how it had felt like a threat, how it had brought James's face rushing back. She hated herself for it, for seeing danger in every touch, for not being able to just be normal. At home, she retreated to her room, pulling out her sketchbook. Her pencil moved frantically, drawing a church with stained glass windows, but behind it, a shadow loomed, faceless and heavy. She tore the page out, her hands shaking, and hid it under her pillow. Henry didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk, writing in his notebook. She's terrified of him. I saw it in her eyes when he came. I don't know what he did, but I'll fight until my last breath to keep her safe. The next morning, he called Sarah, a former housekeeper who'd worked for Susan and James years ago. Sarah's voice was hesitant but firm when she agreed to meet. At a small diner on the edge of town, Sarah sat across from Henry, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. "I saw things," she said quietly. "Things I should have spoken about sooner." He was too close to Emily. At night, when he thought no one was watching. "I told Susan once, but she didn't believe me. Said I was mistaken. Then he threatened to fire me if I spoke again." Henry's hands clenched into fists under the table. "Will you tell that to a judge?" he asked. Sarah nodded, her eyes glassy but resolute. "For Emily?" "Yes." The court date came faster than expected. The town buzzed with whispers. Some stood by Henry, others shook their heads, muttering about James's legal rights. Emily barely spoke in the days leading up to it, her fear a living thing that coiled tighter with each passing hour. She drew more, her sketches growing darker, a girl trapped in a cage of shadows, a man with no face standing at the edge of a field. She didn't show them to Henry, but he found one, left on the kitchen table by accident. His heart broke at the sight, but it also steeled his resolve. The county courthouse was cold, its benches filled with curious neighbors. James sat across the room, his silver-haired lawyer exuding confidence. Henry stood with Laura, a young attorney who'd once been Susan's student. Laura's file was thin, Henry's notes, Emily's drawings, Sarah's statement, but her eyes burned with determination. The trial began, James's lawyer presenting the guardianship agreement signed by Susan, asserting his legal claim. "Mr. Graves has no standing," the lawyer said smoothly. "He's not her father." Laura stepped forward, her voice steady. "Emily's behavior isn't erratic, it's trauma. She's terrified of this man. Her drawings, her nightmares, her fear, they all point to something real." She held up one of Emily's sketches, the girl in the cage, and the room fell silent. The judge called Emily to speak. Her heart pounded, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to tell the truth, to scream it, but her voice wouldn't come. She shook her head, whispering, "I can't." The silence was deafening and Laura's shoulders sagged, knowing they needed more. Then, a voice broke through from the back of the room. "Wait." Sarah stood, small but unyielding, her face tight with urgency. "My name is Sarah Miller. I worked for the family. I need to speak." The courtroom stirred. Laura rushed to confirm Sarah's identity, then handed her a folder, employee records, proof of her time with Susan and James. Sarah's voice shook at first, but grew steady. "I saw him, with Emily at night. More than once. I told her mother, but she wouldn't listen. He threatened me, said he'd ruin me. I stayed quiet too long. I won't anymore." Emily's tears fell, not just from pain but from recognition. Someone else had seen. Someone believed her. Henry wrapped an arm around her, his presence a shield. The judge called a recess, and when he returned, his voice carried weight. Given Ms. Miller's testimony and the psychological state of the minor, the court suspends the plaintiff's guardianship, effective immediately. Custody is granted to Mr. Henry Graves, pending further investigation. Emily squeezed Henry's hand, her tears tasting of relief, like light breaking through a locked door. If this story has touched you, if it reminds you of the power of speaking out, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps voices like Emily's be heard, helps others find the courage to step out of the shadows. Outside, the November air was crisp, the town already glowing with Thanksgiving lights. Emily looked up at Henry, her voice barely above a whisper. Will the nightmares stop now? Henry placed a hand on her head, his smile soft. If they don't, I'll be here. We'll face them together. The courtroom was a battlefield of whispers and glances, the air thick with tension as Sarah's words hung like a storm cloud. Emily sat frozen on the wooden bench, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Sarah's testimony had cracked something open inside her, not just pain, but a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that someone else had seen the truth she'd carried alone for so long. Yet the fear remained, coiled tight in her chest. What if they don't believe her? She thought. What if they think I'm lying, that I made it all up? Her eyes darted to James, sitting across the room, his face a mask of calm that didn't reach his eyes. She knew that look cold, calculated, the same one he'd worn in her nightmares. Laura, the young attorney, stood tall despite the thin file in her hands. She held up another of Emily's drawings, this one showing a girl trapped in a cage of shadows, her small form dwarfed by a looming, faceless figure. This isn't just a child's sketch, Laura said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. This is trauma, drawn in pencil. Emily's nightmares, her fear of footsteps, her inability to speak, they all point to what Ms. Miller has just confirmed. This man, she gestured toward James, is not fit to care for her. James's lawyer leapt to his feet, his voice dripping with condescension. Objection, Your Honor. These are drawings, not evidence. A child's imagination can't override a legal guardianship signed by her mother. He held up Susan's paperwork, the ink stark against the white page, as if it were an unbreakable shield. Laura didn't flinch. Your Honor, children don't draw like this without reason. Emily's fear isn't imaginary, it's rooted in something real. Ms. Miller's testimony corroborates what these drawings scream. She turned to Sarah, who stood resolute, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze unwavering. Ms. Miller, please tell the court exactly what you saw. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice steady now. It was late, maybe midnight. I was cleaning up after a dinner party. I saw him, Mr. Thompson, go into Emily's room. The door was half open, and I heard her crying, soft, like she was trying to hide it. I looked in and saw him, too close, his hands on her. I confronted him the next day, but he said I'd lose my job if I spoke. Susan, she didn't believe me. She said Emily was just confused. Sarah's voice broke, her eyes glistening. I should have done more. I should have fought harder. Emily's tears fell silently, each one a memory she'd tried to bury. She remembered that night, the way James's shadow had filled the doorway, the way her mother's voice had sounded so small when she'd whispered, "Don't tell anyone, Emily. It'll ruin us." The guilt was a knife in her chest, guilt for staying silent, for not saving her mother, for letting the pain fester until it became part of her. She glanced at Henry, his face gray but resolute, his hand resting on hers like an anchor. She wanted to speak, to scream the truth, but her throat was locked tight. James shifted in his seat, his calm facade cracking. His fingers twitched, his eyes darting to the judge, then to Sarah, then to Emily. For a moment, she saw something flicker in his gaze, fear, maybe, or rage. It sent a shiver down her spine, but it also sparked something new, a tiny ember of defiance. He's not untouchable, she thought. Not anymore. The judge called for a recess, and the courtroom emptied into a tense hum of voices. Emily stayed close to Henry, her heart pounding as they stepped into the hallway. Laura whispered to Henry, her voice low but urgent. Sarah's testimony is strong, but we need more. If Emily could speak, even a little, It could tip the scales. Henry looked at Emily, his eyes soft but heavy. "You don't have to, Emily. Not if you're not ready." She nodded, but the weight of his words pressed against her. She wanted to be brave, to give voice to the pain she'd carried, but the fear of being disbelieved was overwhelming. She thought of Susan again, a memory from before everything went wrong. They'd been in the kitchen, Susan humming as she braided Emily's hair, her hands gentle, her laughter warm. "You're my brave girl," Susan had said, her eyes bright. But that was before James, before the silence, before the lies. Emily wondered if her mother would still call her brave now, or if she'd see only a broken girl who couldn't save anyone. The trial resumed, and the judge's voice cut through the room. "Ms. Miller's testimony raises serious concerns, but without direct evidence from the child, we're left with questions." He looked at Emily, his expression kind but firm. "Young lady, do you wish to speak?" Emily's heart stopped. Every eye in the room turned to her, and the weight of their stares was suffocating. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her hands trembled, clutching the edge of the bench. She shook her head, her voice a whisper. I can't." Laura's shoulders sagged, but she recovered quickly, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, silence doesn't mean safety. Emily's drawings, her fear, her trauma, they speak for her. We ask that you consider the evidence before you and protect this child." The judge nodded, his face unreadable as he reviewed the file. The room held its breath. James's lawyer leaned back, a faint smirk on his lips, as if victory was assured. But when the judge spoke again, his words were a hammer. "Given the testimony of Ms. Miller and the psychological state of the minor, the court suspends Mr. Thompson's guardianship, effective immediately. Custody is granted to Mr. Henry Graves, pending a full investigation." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Emily's tears fell faster, not just from relief but from a strange, unfamiliar lightness. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a victim, but as a girl worth fighting for. Henry squeezed her hand, his own trembling slightly, and she squeezed back, her heart pounding with something close to hope. The town was alive with the glow of Thanksgiving preparations as they left the courthouse. Strings of lights draped across the main street, and the scent of wood smoke and baking pies filled the air. Henry and Emily stopped by the church hall, where the community was gathering for a pre-Thanksgiving potluck. Tables groaned under the weight of casseroles, cornbread, and cranberry sauce, and children darted between chairs, their laughter echoing. Emily hesitated at the door, her hoodie pulled tight, but a neighbor, Mrs. Carter, waved them over. "Henry, Emily, come try my sweet potato pie. It's the best in town." Emily managed a small smile, her first in days. Mrs. Carter's warmth, the chatter of the crowd, the glow of the hall, it felt like a world she could almost belong to. She sat beside Henry, picking at a slice of pie, her eyes scanning the room. For a moment, the weight of her fear lifted, replaced by the simple comfort of being surrounded by people who didn't know her pain but cared enough to share their table. That night, back at the house, Emily sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. The stars were bright above the cornfields, and the air carried the faint chill of late November. Henry joined her, a mug of coffee in his hands. "You did good today," he said softly. "Even if you didn't speak. You were there. That's enough." Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "I wanted to," she whispered. "But I was scared. Scared they wouldn't believe me. Or that I'd ruin everything." Henry set his mug down, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't ruin anything, Emily. And you never will. Not with me." She nodded, her throat tight. The memory of Susan came again, her mother's hands braiding her hair, her voice calling her brave. Emily clung to that memory, a lifeline in the dark. The nightmares might not stop, but now they believed they might fade, just a little, with Henry by her side. Part 3. The frost of early December settled over the small town, painting the cornfields in silver and draping the main street with strings of Christmas lights that glowed like stars against the dusk. Emily, now 11, stood on the porch of Henry's wooden house, her breath visible in the chilly air. The victory in court had lifted a weight from her shoulders, but the shadows of her past still lingered, like ghosts that refused to be banished. She clutched her sketchbook, its pages worn from countless nights of drawing, each stroke a battle to make sense of the pain she carried. The nightmares hadn't stopped, but they were softer now, less sharp, as if Henry's quiet presence was slowly sanding down their edges. Inside, the house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the first signs of Christmas creeping in. Henry had dragged a scraggly tree into the living room, its branches uneven but sturdy. "Thought we'd decorate it together," he said, setting a box of ornaments on the floor. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around her sketchbook. Christmas had always been a blur in her old life: Susan's forced smiles, James's heavy footsteps, the tension that choked the air. But here, with Henry, it felt different, like a promise she wasn't sure she could trust. She nodded, setting her sketchbook down. As they hung ornaments, glass balls, tinsel, a star Henry said had been Susan's favorite, Emily felt a warmth she couldn't name. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear but from the strangeness of feeling safe. Henry noticed, his eyes softening. "Your mama loved the star," he said, holding it up. Said it reminded her of hope, no matter how dark the night got. Emily's throat tightened. She remembered Susan hanging that same star, her hands gentle, her voice humming a carol. It was one of the last memories before James came into their lives, before the darkness swallowed everything. "I miss her," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "But sometimes I'm angry at her. She didn't listen. She didn't help me." Henry paused, his hand still on the tree. "She was lost, Emily. But she loved you. I know she did." His voice was heavy, carrying the weight of his own guilt for not seeing Susan's pain sooner. Emily nodded, her eyes stinging, and hung the star on the highest branch she could reach. It caught the light, glinting like a beacon. At school, the air buzzed with holiday excitement, but Emily kept to herself, her hoodie a shield against the world. Her art teacher, Miss Harper, had announced a community project. Students were to create a piece of art to share a personal story, to be displayed at the town hall during the Christmas festival. Emily's stomach twisted at the thought. Sharing meant exposing herself, letting others see the parts of her she'd hidden so carefully. But Miss Harper's kind eyes and gentle encouragement, "You have a voice, Emily, and it's stronger than you think," stayed with her. She started sketching in secret, late at night when the house was quiet. Her pencil moved slowly at first, tracing the outline of a cornfield under a stormy sky. In the center stood a girl, small but unyielding, holding a glowing pencil like a torch. Behind her, shadows loomed, but they didn't touch her. The drawing wasn't just a story, it was her story, a map of her pain and her fight to find light. When she finished, she hid it under her mattress, terrified of what it would mean to show it to anyone. Ms. Harper noticed Emily's hesitation. One day after class, she sat beside her, her voice soft. "There's a group in town, Emily. Kids like you who've been through hard things. They meet at the community center. You don't have to talk, just listen. It might help." Emily's heart raced. The idea of sitting with strangers, of being seen, made her want to run. But Miss Harper's words echoed Henry's. "You don't have to speak if you're not ready." She nodded, barely, and Miss Harper smiled. "I'll tell Henry. He can take you." The group met in a small room at the community center, its walls lined with posters about hope and healing. Emily sat in the corner, her sketchbook on her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. The other kids, 6 of them, ranging from 12 to 16, sat in a loose circle, their voices quiet but honest. One girl, Mia, caught Emily's attention. She was 13, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to carry a storm of their own. When Mia spoke, her words were sharp but real. I used to think it was my fault. What he did to me. But it wasn't. It's taken me a long time to believe that. Emily's breath caught. Mia's story wasn't hers, but it was close enough to make her chest ache. After the meeting, Mia lingered, noticing Emily's sketchbook. "You draw?" she asked, her voice curious but not pushy. Emily nodded, her fingers tightening around the book. "Yeah, it helps." "Me too," Mia said, pulling out a small notebook filled with sketches, angry lines, soft curves, a mix of pain and hope. "Wanna trade?" "One drawing for another." Emily hesitated, then opened her sketchbook to a safe page, a drawing of Daisy, the chicken. Mia grinned, handing over a sketch of a bird breaking free from a cage. "This one's me," she said. "Or who I'm trying to be." That night, Emily lay awake, Mia's drawing beside her bed. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Someone else understood, not just the pain, but the fight to move past it. The next day, she showed Henry the drawing, her voice shy but steady. "She's like me," she said. "Mia. She gets it." Henry's eyes brightened, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds like a friend worth keeping." The Christmas festival arrived, the town hall glowing with lights and garlands. Emily's painting stood on an easel, unveiled for the first time. The crowd was small but warm, neighbors sipping hot cocoa and admiring the students' work. Emily stood beside her painting, her heart pounding as people stopped to look. Ms. Harper's voice carried over the hum of voices. "This is Emily's. It's a story of courage, of finding light in the dark." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. The girl in the painting was her, and for once, she wasn't ashamed. Mia stood nearby, her own drawing displayed, a bird soaring above a broken cage. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. "We're not alone," Emily thought, and the thought was a lifeline. If this story resonates with you, if it reminds you of the power of art and friendship to heal, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like Emily's and Mia's reach others, giving voice to those still finding their way out of the dark. Henry stood at the back of the room, his straw hat in his hands, his eyes glinting with pride. After the festival, they walked home under a sky scattered with stars, the town quiet except for the soft hum of Christmas carols from distant houses. Emily held her sketchbook close, Mia's drawing tucked inside. "Do you think Mama would have liked my painting?" she asked, her voice soft. Henry paused, his breath visible in the cold air. "She'd have been proud, Emily. Prouder than I can say." Emily nodded, her heart full but heavy. The scars were still there, but they were hers now, not chains but marks of survival. With Henry by her side and Mia's friendship anchoring her, she felt something new, a belief that she could keep going, one drawing, one day at a time. The town hall buzzed with warmth, the Christmas festival in full swing. Strings of lights twinkled along the rafters, and the air was thick with the scent of hot cocoa and freshly baked gingerbread. Emily stood beside her painting, her heart hammering against her ribs. The canvas was a window into her soul, a cornfield under a stormy sky, a girl holding a glowing pencil, shadows lurking but held at bay. Neighbors paused to look, their murmurs soft but genuine. "That's powerful," one woman whispered, her eyes lingering on the girl in the painting. "She's been through something, hasn't she?" Emily's cheeks burned, but she didn't look away. For the first time, she didn't feel like hiding. The crowd's attention wasn't a spotlight of judgment, but a quiet acknowledgement of her courage. Ms. Harper stood nearby, her smile proud but gentle. "You did this, Emily," she said softly. "You told your story, and they see it." Across the room, Mia's drawing hung on another easel, a bird soaring above a shattered cage, its wings bold against a dawn sky. Mia caught Emily's eye and grinned, a silent "we did it." Emily nodded, her fingers tightening around her sketchbook. She'd never thought sharing her pain could feel like this, like letting go of a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. After the festival, Emily and Mia sat on a bench outside the town hall, the cold December air biting at their faces. The street was alive with Christmas lights, their glow reflecting off the snow-dusted ground. Mia flipped open her notebook, showing Emily a new sketch, a tree with roots breaking through stone. "This is us," she said, her voice steady. "We're still here, even after everything." Emily hesitated, then opened her own sketchbook to a drawing she hadn't shown anyone, a girl standing in a field, her back to a dark house, a single star shining above her. "This was me," she whispered. "Before Henry. Before, here." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "I thought I'd always be stuck in that house, with him." Mia's eyes softened, not with pity but with understanding. "I used to think that, too. My uncle, he made me feel like I was nothing. But you know what? We're not nothing. We're stronger than they are." Emily's throat tightened, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Mia's words were a mirror, reflecting a truth she'd been too afraid to see. She thought of Susan, of a summer day when they'd sat on a porch much like Henry's, eating watermelon and laughing until their sides hurt. Susan had tucked a strand of hair behind Emily's ear, her voice soft. "You're my light, Emmy. Don't ever let anyone dim you." But then James had come, and Susan's light had faded, her laughter replaced by silence. Emily had blamed herself for not speaking up, for not saving her mother. The guilt was a stone in her chest, heavy and unyielding. "I wish I'd told her," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "I tried once, but she said it was my fault for misunderstanding. I should have tried harder." Mia reached out, her hand resting lightly on Emily's arm. "It wasn't your fault. You were a kid. You did what you could." Emily nodded, but the guilt didn't vanish. It was part of her, like the scars she'd never show. Yet sitting there with Mia, under the glow of Christmas lights, she felt a shift, a small, fragile belief that maybe she wasn't broken beyond repair. The next day, Emily returned to the community center for another group meeting. She was still quiet, still kept her sketchbook close, but she listened more intently now. When Mia shared a story about a nightmare that had kept her awake, Emily found herself speaking, her voice soft but clear. "I get those too. Like, he's still there, watching me." The words felt like glass, sharp and dangerous, but saying them out loud was like letting out a breath she'd held too long. The other kids nodded, their silence not judgmental but supportive. For the first time, Emily felt like she belonged somewhere. Christmas Eve arrived, and Henry invited Ms. Harper and Mrs. Carter over for a small gathering. The house was warm with the glow of candles and the scent of roasted chestnuts. Henry had strung lights around the porch, their soft glow spilling into the living room. Emily helped set the table, her movements careful but less guarded. Ms. Harper brought a homemade pecan pie, and Mrs. Carter carried a tin of sugar cookies shaped like stars. The women's laughter filled the house, a sound Emily hadn't realized she'd missed. After dinner, they sat around the tree, its ornaments glinting in the candlelight. Ms. Harper turned to Emily, her eyes kind. "Your painting at the festival, it moved people, Emily. It made them think. That's a gift." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she managed a small smile. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said, her voice quiet. "I thought they'd just see me as broken." Henry leaned forward, his silver hair catching the light. "You're not broken, Emily. You're strong. Stronger than most folks I know." His words settled into her, warm and steady, like the fire crackling in the hearth. She thought of Susan again, of that watermelon summer, of the star on the tree. Maybe her mother hadn't been able to save her, but she'd given her Henry, and that was enough. Emily looked around the room, at Henry's weathered hands, Ms. Harper's gentle smile, Mrs. Carter's laughter, the star glowing above them, and felt something new, a sense of home, fragile but real. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily pulled out her sketchbook. She drew the house, its wooden walls sturdy against a snowy sky, two figures standing on the porch, one tall, one small. Beneath it, she wrote in careful letters, "Home, where the light stays on." The nightmares might come again, but they didn't own her anymore. With Henry, Mia, and her art, Emily was starting to believe she could be more than her scars. She could be a girl who chose her own story. The glow of the Christmas festival lingered in Emily's mind as she walked home with Henry, the snow crunching softly under her boots. The town hall had been a sea of faces, their eyes lingering on her painting with a mix of awe and quiet respect. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who'd brought sweet potato pie to the Thanksgiving potluck, had paused longest, her hand resting on Emily's shoulder. "This painting," she'd said, her voice thick with emotion, "it's like you've given a voice to something we all feel but can't say." "You're a brave girl, Emily." The words had startled Emily, not because they were kind, but because they felt true. For so long, she'd seen herself as a shadow, a girl defined by what had been done to her. But standing there, surrounded by the hum of the festival, she glimpsed something else, a version of herself that could be strong, could be seen. Back at home, Emily sat on her bed, her sketchbook open to the drawing she'd shown Mia, the girl under a single star, turning away from a dark house. She traced the lines, her fingers lingering on the star. It reminded her of another memory, one she hadn't let herself touch in years. She was 6, maybe 7, sitting on the floor of their old apartment with Susan. Her mother had been painting Emily's nails a soft pink, her hands steady despite the tiredness in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Emmy," Susan had whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry I can't fix everything." Emily hadn't understood then, but now she did. Susan had known something was wrong, had seen the way James looked at her daughter, but she'd been too afraid to act. The memory cut deep, not just for the pain but for the love it held. Emily had wanted to save her mother, to pull her out of that dark house, but she'd been too small, too silent. The guilt was a weight she carried, heavier than the nightmares. The next day, Emily met Mia at the community center, not for the group meeting, but for a quiet moment of their own. They sat on the steps outside, the winter air sharp against their faces, their sketchbooks open between them. Mia flipped to a new drawing, a girl standing on a cliff, her arms outstretched as if ready to fly. "This is what I want to be," Mia said, her voice soft but fierce. "Free. Not afraid anymore." Emily hesitated, then showed Mia a sketch she'd kept hidden, a girl curled up in a corner, shadows pressing in, but a faint light glowing from her hands. "This was me," she admitted, her voice trembling. When James was there. I thought if I stayed quiet, it'd stop. But it didn't." Mia's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "You didn't make it happen, Emily. He did. And you're not that girl anymore. You're here with me, with Henry. You're fighting." The words were a lifeline, pulling Emily from the depths of her guilt. She thought of Susan again, of that whispered apology, and realized something new. Her mother hadn't been weak, just trapped, like she'd been. "I want to forgive her," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "But it's hard." Mia nodded, her hand resting lightly on Emily's sketchbook. "It's okay if it takes time. You're allowed to feel everything." That evening, Henry's house was alive with the warmth of Christmas Eve. Ms. Harper and Mrs. Carter arrived, their arms full of gifts and baked goods. The living room glowed with candlelight, the tree sparkling with ornaments, and a soft carol played from an old radio. Emily helped set out plates of cookies and pie, her movements less hesitant now. Mrs. Carter pulled her into a gentle hug, her voice warm. "You've made this house brighter, Emily. Don't you ever forget that." Emily's heart swelled, but the fear lingered, a quiet whisper in the back of her mind. What if James comes back? What if this happiness is temporary? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the laughter, the clink of glasses, the way Henry's eyes crinkled when he smiled. After dinner, they gathered around the tree, exchanging small gifts. Henry handed Emily a wrapped package, a new set of colored pencils, their tips sharp and vibrant. "Thought you could use these," he said, his voice gruff but kind. Emily's fingers trembled as she opened the box, the colors gleaming in the candlelight. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she didn't look away, didn't search for judgment in his gaze. All she saw was love, steady and unyielding. As the night wound down, Miss Harper shared a story about her own childhood, about finding strength in small things: a book, a kind word, a moment of courage. Emily listened, her sketchbook open on her lap, and began to draw, a tree with branches reaching for the sky, its roots deep and strong. It wasn't just her story anymore, it was theirs, woven together by the people who'd chosen to see her. Later, as the guests left and the house grew quiet, Emily sat with Henry on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. The stars were bright above the cornfields, and the distant sound of carols drifted from the town. "I'm scared sometimes," she admitted, her voice soft. "That he'll come back. That I'll lose this." Henry's hand rested gently on her shoulder, his voice steady. "He won't take you from me, Emily. And this home, this life, it's yours. Always will be." Emily nodded, her heart full but still heavy with the weight of her scars. She thought of Mia's drawing, of the girl ready to fly, and of her own painting, the girl with the glowing pencil. She wasn't free yet, not completely, but she was closer than she'd ever been. With Henry's hand on her shoulder, Mia's friendship in her heart, and her art as her voice, Emily felt the first stirrings of a new belief. She could be more than her past. She could be a girl who chose her own light. The new year crept closer, wrapping the small town in a quiet anticipation. Snow dusted the cornfields, and the main street glowed with lanterns, their soft light a promise of fresh beginnings. But inside Henry's wooden house, the air was heavy with worry. Emily, now 12, sat at the kitchen table, her sketchbook open but untouched. The colored pencils Henry had given her for Christmas lay scattered, their vibrant tips dulled by her restless fingers. She'd felt safe these past weeks, buoyed by the warmth of Christmas and Mia's friendship, but a new shadow loomed. James was back. It had started with a letter, delivered just after Christmas, its crisp envelope a stark contrast to the warmth of the season. Henry had opened it in the living room, his hands steady but his face growing pale as he read. James had filed an appeal, claiming Henry, at 72, was too old and frail to care for a growing girl. The words were cold, legal, but their intent was clear. James wanted Emily back, not out of love, but out of control. Henry had folded the letter and tucked it away, but Emily had seen the worry in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged as he turned to the window. "Henry," she'd asked, her voice small. "What's wrong?" He'd forced a smile, his voice gruff. "Nothing you need to worry about, Emily. Just some paperwork. We'll handle it." But Emily wasn't a child anymore, not in the way she'd been when she first arrived. She saw the truth in the way Henry moved slower some mornings, the way he rubbed his chest when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd overheard him on the phone with his doctor, his voice low as he scheduled tests for his heart. The fear settled into her like frost, cold and unyielding. "What if he's sick?" she thought. "What if I lose him too?" The thought of James dragging her back to that dark house was terrifying, but the idea of a world without Henry was unthinkable. One snowy afternoon, Emily found a crumpled receipt in Henry's coat pocket, a pharmacy slip for heart medication. Her breath caught, her hands trembling as she confronted him in the kitchen. "You're sick, aren't you?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she meant. "Why didn't you tell me?" Henry's eyes widened, then softened with guilt. He set down the knife he'd been using to chop carrots, his shoulders slumping. "It's just some tests, Emily. Nothing's certain yet. I didn't want to scare you." "Scare me?" Her voice broke, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm already scared. If you're sick, if something happens to you, he'll take me back." "I can't go back, Henry. I can't." The words spilled out, raw and desperate, carrying the weight of every nightmare, every memory of James's heavy hands. Henry crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into a hug. His arms were strong despite his age, his voice steady. "You're not going anywhere, Emily. Not while I'm breathing. I promise you that." She clung to him, her face pressed against his flannel shirt, the scent of pine and coffee grounding her. But the fear didn't vanish. It lingered, a quiet pulse beneath her skin, as she lay awake that night, her sketchbook open to a blank page. She drew without thinking, a girl standing in a field, a storm brewing behind her, but this time, a tall figure stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. It was Henry, steady as ever, but his outline was faint, as if he could fade. The drawing scared her, not because of the storm, but because of what it meant to lose him. Henry wasn't idle. He drove to the county seat the next day, meeting with Laura, the young attorney who'd fought for them before. Her office was small, cluttered with files, but her eyes burned with the same fire Emily remembered. "James's appeal is strong," Laura admitted, flipping through the paperwork. "He's got a new lawyer, and they're leaning hard on your age and health. We need evidence, something to show you're fit, and that Emily's better off with you." Henry nodded, his jaw tight. "What about Emily? Can she say something?" Laura's expression softened. "If she's ready, a statement from her could make all the difference. But only if she's ready." Back home, Henry sat Emily down, his voice gentle. "The court's coming up, Emily. They'll want to know what you want. You don't have to speak, but if you do, I'll be right there." Emily's heart raced, the memory of the last trial flooding back, the weight of every eye, the fear of not being believed. But she wasn't the same girl anymore. Mia's friendship, her art, Henry's love, they'd built something inside her, a strength she hadn't known she had. She thought of Mia's drawing, the girl ready to fly, and of her own painting, the girl with the glowing pencil. "I want to try," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "I want to tell them I belong here." Henry's eyes glistened, pride mixing with worry. "You're braver than you know," he said, his hand squeezing hers. The town buzzed with preparations for New Year's Eve, the main square set to light up with fireworks and music. Emily and Henry attended a community potluck, their table crowded with neighbors who'd become like family. Mrs. Carter with her cornbread, Ms. Harper with a tray of brownies, Mia and her mother sharing a bowl of chili. Emily sat beside Mia, their sketchbooks tucked under their chairs, a silent reminder of their bond. When Mrs. Carter raised a glass to new beginnings, Emily managed a small smile, but her mind was on the trial, on the letter she'd started writing in secret. Late that night, while Henry slept, Emily sat at the kitchen table, her colored pencils spread out. She wrote slowly, her words careful but raw, pouring her heart onto the page. "My name is Emily, and I'm 12 years old. I used to live in a place where I was afraid every night. James, my stepfather, hurt me in ways I couldn't say out loud. I thought no one would believe me. But then I came to live with my grandpa, Henry. He gave me a home, a real home, where I can draw, where I can laugh, where I'm not scared of footsteps. He's not just my grandpa, he's my family. Please don't take me away from him. I'm safe here. I'm happy here." She signed her name, her hand shaking, and folded the letter, tucking it into her sketchbook. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that was enough. The court date arrived with a bitter January chill. The courthouse was familiar now, its cold benches filled with the same curious faces. James sat across the room, his new lawyer polished and confident, his suit as sharp as his smile. But Emily saw the cracks, the way his fingers fidgeted, the way his eyes avoided hers. Laura stood beside Henry, her file thicker this time, filled with medical records proving Henry's heart condition was manageable, letters from neighbors attesting to his care, and Sarah's reaffirmed testimony. The trial began, James's lawyer painting Henry as a frail old man, incapable of raising a teenager. Mr. Graves' health is declining, he said smoothly. Emily needs stability, not uncertainty. Laura countered, her voice fierce. Stability isn't just a house or a paycheck, it's love, safety, a place to heal. Henry Graves has given Emily all of that and more. When the judge asked if Emily wished to speak, she stood, her knees trembling but her head high. Laura handed the judge her letter, and Emily's voice, though soft, carried through the room. I wrote this for you to know what Henry means to me. He's my home. James, he never did. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years, of pain she'd finally given a name. James's mask slipped. His hands clenched, his jaw tightening as he leaned forward, as if to speak. But his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. Emily saw the flicker of rage in his eyes, the same rage she'd seen in her nightmares, but it didn't scare her anymore. She was stronger now, not because the fear was gone, but because she'd learned to face it. The judge's voice broke the silence. Miss Thompson's letter and testimony, combined with the evidence of Mr. Graves' care and Mr. Thompson's prior actions, paint a clear picture. This court affirms Mr. Graves' custody permanently. Mr. Thompson's guardianship is terminated and a restraining order will be issued. A cheer erupted from the back, Mrs. Carter's voice rising above the rest. Emily turned to Henry, her tears falling freely now, and threw her arms around him. We're safe, she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. We're really safe. Henry held her close, his own eyes wet. Always, kid. Always. New Year's Eve arrived, the town square ablaze with fireworks that painted the sky in gold and red. Emily and Henry stood among the crowd, Mia beside them, their faces tilted toward the stars. The air was alive with music and laughter, neighbors sharing hot cider and resolutions. Emily clutched her sketchbook, a new drawing inside, a girl and an old man under a sky of fireworks, their hands linked, a home glowing behind them. She wasn't free of her scars, but they were part of her now, not chains but markers of a journey she'd survived. As the final firework burst, Emily looked at Henry, his silver hair catching the light. Happy New Year, she said, her voice steady. He squeezed it gently, his smile brighter than the fireworks. Happy New Year, Emily. Here's to us and to every year after. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Laura finished reading Emily's letter, her voice echoing with a quiet power that silenced even the whispers in the back. Emily sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap, her heart pounding as the words she'd written in the dead of night filled the room. Each sentence was a piece of her, laid bare for strangers to judge, and yet, as Laura's voice carried her truth, she felt a strange lightness, as if she'd set down a burden she'd carried too long. She glanced at Henry, his weathered face tight with emotion, his hand steady on hers. Across the room, James's facade cracked further, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the judge, then to the floor, unable to meet the weight of Emily's words. The judge set the letter down, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Emily. Young lady, he said, his voice kind but firm, your words carry weight. They tell a story of pain, but also of hope. This court hears you. Emily's tears fell silently, not from fear but from a recognition she'd never dared hope for. She thought of Susan, of a night long ago when her mother had held her close, her voice trembling with a promise she couldn't keep. I'll make things right, Emmy, Susan had whispered, her arms tight around her daughter. I'll get us out. But the next day, James's shadow had loomed larger, and Susan's resolve had crumbled. Emily had blamed herself for years, for not being brave enough to speak, for not saving them both. But now, hearing her letter read aloud, she felt a shift, a quiet forgiveness, not just for her mother, but for the girl she'd been, small and scared, but still here. Laura turned to the judge, her voice fierce. Your Honor, Emily's letter isn't just a plea, it's evidence of the life Henry Graves has built for her. Medical records show Mr. Graves' condition is managed, and this community, she gestured to the crowded benches where Mrs. Carter, Ms. Harper, and Mia sat, their faces alight with hope, stands behind them. Mr. Thompson offers nothing but a history of harm. James's lawyer rose, his confidence fraying. Your Honor, emotional appeals don't change facts. Mr. Graves' health is a risk, and my client, enough, the judge interrupted, his voice sharp. The court has heard enough. He paused, his eyes lingering on Emily, then Henry. Custody is affirmed to Mr. Henry Graves, permanently. Mr. Thompson's guardianship is terminated, and a restraining order will be issued. This matter is closed. The room erupted. Mrs. Carter clapped her hands, her voice ringing out, thank God. Miss Harper wiped tears from her eyes, and Mia leapt from her seat, her grin wide as she rushed to Emily. You did it, she whispered, pulling Emily into a hug. Emily clung to her, the warmth of Mia's embrace a reminder that she wasn't alone. She turned to Henry, his arms open, and buried herself in his chest, her sobs muffled against his flannel shirt. We're safe, she repeated, as if saying it again would make it more real. James stood, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He muttered something to his lawyer, then strode out, his footsteps echoing in the now quiet room. Emily watched him go, her heart pounding but not with fear. For the first time, he was just a man, not a monster, not a shadow that could reach her. She was free. New Year's Eve painted the town in light and sound. The main square was alive with fireworks, their bursts of gold, red and blue illuminating the snow-dusted streets. Neighbors gathered, their voices mingling with the strains of Auld Lang Syne and the clink of cider glasses. Emily stood beside Henry, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, Mia at her side. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine, and the crowd's laughter felt like a blanket wrapping around her. Mia pulled out her own sketchbook, flipping to a blank page. Let's draw the fireworks, she said, her eyes bright. Something to remember tonight. Emily nodded, her colored pencils gleaming in the firelight. They sat on a bench, their hands moving quickly, capturing the arcs of light against the night sky. Emily's drawing was more than fireworks. It was a girl standing tall, a house glowing behind her, a sky full of possibilities. Mia's was a bird, its wings spread wide, soaring above a field of stars. They exchanged sketches, a silent promise to keep going together. Mrs. Carter joined them, her arms full of blankets. You girls are gonna freeze out here, she said, draping a quilt over their shoulders. Ms. Harper stood nearby, chatting with Henry, her laughter warm. The community had become a tapestry, each person a thread weaving Emily into their lives. She thought of Susan again, of that broken promise, and felt a pang of sorrow but also peace. I'm okay, Mama, she thought. I found my home. As the final firework burst, the crowd cheered, glasses raised to new beginnings. Emily turned to Henry, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said, her hand finding his. For everything. Henry's smile was brighter than the stars, his hand squeezing hers. You're my light, Emily. Always will be. The spring of Emily's 16th year bloomed across the small town, painting the cornfields in vibrant green and dotting the main street with tulips and daffodils. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh earth and hope, as the community prepared for Easter, a season of renewal that felt like a mirror to Emily's own journey. Now a young woman, she stood taller, her dark hair tied back with a blue ribbon, her eyes no longer shadowed by fear but bright with a quiet strength. The scars of her past remained, etched into her heart, but they were no longer chains, they were markers of a road she'd traveled, a story she'd chosen to tell. Henry's wooden house had become a canvas for Emily's art, its walls covered with paintings of fields, chickens, and stars, each one a step toward healing. The attic, once dusty and forgotten, was now her studio, filled with canvases and colored pencils, a sanctuary where she turned pain into light. She was preparing for a new challenge, a state youth art showcase, where her work had been selected to represent their small town. The painting she'd chosen was an evolution of her first, a girl in a cornfield, no longer holding a pencil but a lantern, its glow pushing back the shadows. Beside her stood a tall figure, silver-haired and steady, a tribute to Henry. The morning of the showcase, Emily stood in the town hall, now transformed into a gallery for the state event. Her painting hung prominently, its colors vivid under the soft lights. Mia stood beside her, her own artwork, a soaring bird against a sunrise, displayed nearby. "You nervous?" Mia asked, her grin teasing but warm. Emily laughed, a sound that came easier now. "A little, but it feels right, like I'm not hiding anymore." Mia squeezed her hand. "You're not. You're shining." The crowd was larger than Emily expected, a mix of locals and visitors from across the state. Mrs. Carter and Ms. Harper were there, their faces beaming with pride, and Henry stood at the back, his straw hat in his hands, his eyes glinting with something deeper than words. When the curator called Emily to speak about her painting, she took a deep breath, her heart steady despite the sea of faces. "This painting is my story," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's about being afraid, about feeling broken, but finding people who help you see your own light. My grandpa Henry gave me that. He gave me a home, not just a place to live, but a place to be me." She glanced at Henry, her smile trembling but bright. "This is for him, and for everyone who's ever felt lost, but kept going." The room erupted in applause, soft at first, then swelling with warmth. Henry's smile was brighter than the spring sun, his hand brushing away a tear. Mia whispered, "Told you. You're a star." Easter Sunday dawned with a golden light, the town alive with the hum of celebration. The church hall hosted a community festival, its tables laden with dyed eggs, hot cross buns, and baskets of flowers. Emily and Henry arrived together, her arm linked through his, a quiet ease between them. The years had aged Henry, his hair now fully silver, his steps a little slower, but his smile, the one he saved for Emily, was unchanged. She noticed the way he paused to catch his breath, the faint tremor in his hands, but she also saw his strength, the way he'd fought for her, the way he'd never let go. After the festival,